So today I'm joined by Dr. Cheryl Burdett, a naturopathic doctor and co-founder of Precision Point Diagnostics and medical director of KHS. Now we're going to take a deep dive into some things I think that really affect your health, but sometimes people don't really have a good understanding. Things like food sensitivity testing, leaky gut markers, oxidative stress, and maybe advanced cardiovascular markers, but how certain patterns affect things like your energy, inflammation, gut health, and your long-term disease risk. And so my goal for today is to take maybe this complicated topic and make it a little simpler so you can understand these tests and really understand what they're telling you, but more importantly, learn how you can move the needle on these tests to provide better health. So Dr. Burdett, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
So when you're looking at advanced testing on things like we mentioned, are you looking for disease or are you looking for patterns of dysfunction before disease really fully develops?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that that's a little bit of how we have ended up where we were at, because there are these stats that even talk about when people go in and see their primary care physician and they're good about it and they do it once a year like they're supposed to, they don't actually live longer. And so that's a little bit frustrating. And I don't think that that's clinicians out there, but I think it has a lot to do with some of the biomarkers that we choose to look at and how we choose to look at them. And so to your point, really testing was set up and it was accepted when it was there to create a diagnosis, a label. And so, for example, measure cholesterol, that gives us the diagnosis of hypercholesterolemia, which just means your cholesterol's high. And so that is really what the focus was on. But for, you and I in the integrative space, absolutely, we care about that. But we also care about the why behind it. So as we look at cholesterol, or maybe even, more predictive extrapolations of that, as we look at that, we want to know, well, why is it high in the first place? And so that will lead us to, well, what's the process behind that? And so are there signals to the liver like free radicals or what we call oxidative stress saying to make more fat? Are we doing things that inflame our body, like eating foods that aren't good for us? Not even just fatty foods, not even just the burgers and the fries. And sure, they have high cholesterol and they'll contribute, but even more so sugar. It's the major signal to the liver to even make cholesterol. So looking at, what's your nutritional level? What's your level of free radicals? What's your level of inflammation, mental, emotional stress, toxicity? None of those things are per se an ICD-10 code, a diagnosis, depression or anxiety or irritable bowel disease, but they're the process behind those things that can make it worse. Do you have the right nutrients? Do you have too many free radicals? And so testing was set up in a different way to say, let's figure out a name for this, of what condition this is. And we want to know what condition it is. That's important. But we also want to see the process behind the condition. So looking at foods you react to that create inflammation just become logical, because that can make so many things worse.
So so at this point I hear, and that's the thing, as well as me, we're getting inundated right now through social media and online. Order this test, try this. There's the functional medicine testing is kind of crazy. In your mind, when you're looking at evaluating tests that give you patterns to be predictive to help set yourself up for better success, what type of tests do you see? I'm not talking about specific tests, but how do you determine a test to be clinically useful, whether it really changes a plan or not, or just gives you a number and you're like, okay, yeah, now what do I do with it?
Yeah, does it help us to change behavior? And so, I'm right there with Hippocrates. Wow, that's a big compliment to myself. I just meant I think in a similar way. I don't mean I'm elevated to a level of Hippocrates, but when he said, let food be thy medicine, I will certainly second that. And so we're going to eat every single day. Most of us are probably going to eat multiple times a day outside of fasting and that kind of thing. And so every time we eat, we have the opportunity to either eat something that gives us nutrition or that potentially inflames our body. And unfortunately, we have gotten to a point, and this has to do with soil quality and in pesticides and whatnot, that the way we've taken in food irritates our immune system. And so we've become even sensitive to foods that would otherwise be healthy. And so if you've ever we've all been there, right? It's the end of the holidays. It's maybe New Year's. We're going to tighten up. We're going to eat the right foods. And we do that. And yet you're like, I know I'm eating better than I was back in December or whatnot. And yet the weight isn't moving. You could be falling into this trap of You're eating healthy foods, but your body is reacting to them. And so really having something like which foods are best for you sets a firm foundation for most conditions to improve, because what doesn't get better when the nutrition in our body gets better? And so, and there are a lot of great diets out there that we can do, like Mediterranean diet has good data, absolutely. Of course, we don't need to be eating lots and lots of processed food and carbohydrates. We don't need a test to know that. We should try to increase vegetables. But what if you end up eating something that you're sensitive to? Now you're making all those good choices, you're doing the hard work, and yet still not seeing the results. And that's one thing for weight loss, but these same foods that we're sensitive to can increase inflammation in terms of not just weight loss, but maybe autoimmunity or pain, or even depression can be thought of as inflammation in the brain. Foundationally, are you eating the best diet for you? And that's why looking at something like foods is important. And I'll just throw right in there real quick. And then I also like to know, what are your levels of free radicals? Like, we all know free radicals are bad. We all know antioxidants are good. We know that the more free radicals, it damages tissue, it increases aging, it could create mutations to genes that could end up causing cancer. Well, like, we know that's bad, but are we looking at it in a meaningful way? And I mean, and the preponderance of research that says that is huge. But again, it's not a diagnosis. It makes most conditions worse, but it's not the condition, the endpoint of that condition itself. In fact, it's likely a precursor. All this was going on that caused you to get the condition. And our medicine tends to be, standard of care medicine tends to be more focused on that last stage endpoint rather than prevention. So looking at free radicals, looking at foods you're eating, and even looking at why your liver is making certain lipids, and if they're even bad, these are all things that are really fundamental to overall health.
So I heard two things there. One, I heard it's all about personalization. We're all so unique. We have different environments. We have different genetics. We have different nutrient statuses. And so that's going to affect one person that may make a food good for them, and it may make another person where that's just not best. And then the other thing I heard is balance. Our bodies are in balance, whether it be our immune system, our hormones, all of these things. And if things get out of balance, it sets up processes that set us up for further healthcare disasters down the road. So it's trying to catch those early. So let's jump into food sensitivity testing. You've mentioned food a lot so far. And I think one of the things that gets confused about is I don't think people realize that your body can react to food as if it was reacting to a virus or a bacteria or something like that. And you wouldn't think that would happen. Our body's supposed to know good from bad, bad from good, but things get a little wonky sometimes. So when somebody talks about food sensitivity testing, heavily debated, some swear by it, some blow it off. What do you think the truth about food sensitivity testing really is?
I see it day in, day out clinically make a difference in how people are doing. Besides that, there is a virtual boatload of peer-reviewed medical research that says it does matter. If we had said this 30 years ago, we wouldn't find that level of data. And so sometimes when people are critical of this testing, it's because their information's a little bit dated. But immunology has come a long way in 30 years. And so food sensitivities mean that you're reacting to a food, but it's not an allergy. That's not really debated. Like, you eat a strawberry and your lips swell, that's an allergy. You know, nobody really, that's not a hot topic at the moment of whether or not that actually exists. That exists. It's escalating. More kids have EpiPens than ever before. 1 out of 4 kids are now allergic to various foods. So that's through the roof. However, we can react to foods in a different way. We don't always swell. It's not always immediate. And those are what we call food sensitivities. They happen 3 to 72 hours afterwards. They're mediated by a different part of the immune system. And so, if we back this conversation up, 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or even with some people right now, they'll say food sensitivities don't exist. And they might even say that part of the immune system creates tolerance. And so that's really weird and backwards. Why would immunologists say such a thing? Well, it's again, unfortunately, because they haven't been keeping up with the data. And so IgG is what mediates this food sensitivity. It's an antibody that your immune system makes. It gets confused. instead of attacking a bug that it should have done, it's now attacking a food because, all the stress and the pesticides and the even too much sugar irritate our gut lining, and it becomes more permeable and open. And so now things get in that shouldn't, bits of food. And when that occurs, the immune system goes, oh no, foreign invader, your broccoli is not supposed to be here in this form. And so boom, make an antibody, and their IgG is their name. And back, at one point, some people said, no, that's even a marker of tolerance. So how could we be so confused about this? Well, it's because science was confused, and it gets better. Science continues to get better. So it turns out this IgG that floats around, there isn't one type. There are 4 types. And in fact, there is one type that creates tolerance, but the rest of those 3 types create inflammation. So part of the confusion was just we didn't have methodologies that were good enough to really tell the difference. Now we do. So now we can individualize a lot better if we tease out these different types of antibodies that are really specific about what we're looking at. But when people say that's not data-driven, it's likely because they haven't looked at the data in the past 20 years, because that's just not an accurate statement at this point.
Okay, so that's some great info. So I want to ask you a few questions. So you mentioned that immediate allergic reaction, i.e. somebody eats peanuts, their lips swell, EpiPen, that's IgE, immediate response, full-blown body blows up and our immune system goes crazy. You then mentioned something called IgG, which is this slow reactive things that you call that drive sensitivity. So I want to make sure people understand that. And then within IgG, there's actually different forms that mean different things, correct?
Correct. And if we wanted to make it even more confusing, there are different add-ons that can even make that IgG worse.
Like complement? You're talking about like
complement, yeah.
So like as a pharmacist, I learned all this in pharmacy school, so I don't want to get in the weeds. So you mentioned IgE immediate, IgG slow, but then there's certain things, something like complement. Tell me what complement does to make the IgG worse.
Yeah, so this was another thing that created some criticism of IgG. People would say, well, just because it's there, you're not always seeing a symptom. And, or just the ones that are at highest don't create the largest symptom. And so then we went on to figure out, oh, it's not even just that type of IgG, but other things can bind to it that amplify the signal. So complement acts a little like an antenna. Sending out a stronger signal and accepting a stronger signal, drawing more white blood cells to the area, creating more inflammation. And this is all well and good. If you're trying to fight a bug, an infection, you want some of that for a minute to kill that stuff. But if your body's now confused and doing that to broccoli or chicken, we don't want that. And so now when complement's there, even more white blood cells, even more inflammation. And so it amplifies that reaction. And so unfortunately, not all food sensitivity testing subtypes IgG and also looks at complement to know what IgG is the worst. So we're just got to move with the science. And some of those criticisms were valid back in the day because our science wasn't strong enough to sort things out. But we were right about foods creating symptoms, and because even before we had the testing we really needed, we knew that if we could take certain foods out of the diet, people got better. And so there are certain foods that just tend to cause more reactions. Wheat and dairy, those are some. But otherwise, you're just hoping you get lucky, just saying these are the ones that affect most people. Let's take a handful of those out. Let's see how they do. And you do get lucky a lot with wheat and gluten for sure. But, again, what if it was broccoli? What if it was chicken? And then the other scary thing about this is, well, I'm not going to take chicken out of my diet for forever. But that was never intended. Food sensitivities are not done to exclude and make your diet smaller forever and ever and ever. They're done to do that for a moment in time so we can heal the gut and then actually bring them back in so you can have a bigger, more robust diet that's less inflammatory.
So I just heard a couple things. This is great info. So food sensitivity tests should not become a forever food ban list, right?
Correct.
And why is that such an important point?
Because it's a therapeutic diet. We're doing it as a therapy. And this is also why it's best to work with somebody like yourself or, to get some help with this, because if you just go out there and find some test online and then remove foods, it's going to be difficult for you to know what your next steps are, when to bring them in, and why won't you be reactive again when you bring them in. And so when you're working with people in the functional space and the integrative space, we focus a lot on gut. So we're going to do things to make the gut less leaky. And then as you do that, the foods don't leak in, they don't confuse the immune system. And so we can do that, and we can heal the gut. And at the same time, we can also look at some markers of leaky gut. These are things that you can measure in the blood, how leaky it is. And so when the gut's no longer leaky, bring those foods back in, open the diet back up, and have less symptoms and eat more salads.
So the way you explained that's great. The way you explain the immune system ties into how we work with patients on the nutrition side. So we teach a weight loss class. We eliminate many of the foods you mentioned, dairy. We actually recommend grains. But one of the things we talked about is on some of these foods, people eliminate them. You know that as well as me. They feel great. Their aches and pains go away. Their skin gets better. They have a lot more energy. They have less brain fog. You do a food sensitivity test. Many times these things light up. But the way I explain it is if you're going to introduce a food, you've eliminated it. Let's say we fixed the gut, and we'll get into that in a minute. You want to introduce back a food. If you introduce back a food, you can't be introducing a new food every day because this immune system, parts of it react fast, parts of it react slow. You've got to give yourself time to react. Is that this whole immune system thing? Explain that, why somebody who eliminates a food wants to do it, add them back slowly, because you have to see how the body's going to react.
And that's exactly what we want to see. It's much less about a piece of paper or a specific thing that gets printed out, and it's much more about what is happening in your body. So exactly what you said is spot on in terms of advice for our patients. Yeah, if you just reintroduced everything at once, you wouldn't know. So I'll tell people bring in one food and then give it at least 72 hours. Sometimes if it's a skin condition, then even more, because like a psoriasis or whatnot can take a little bit longer to erupt. But in general, we want to introduce something and then wait 72 hours. And what you're looking for are those symptoms that you had before. Are they being provoked? Are they coming back? If it was headaches, do you have a headache? If it was mood, are you feeling a bit more blue? If it was weight, did all of a sudden you see a 3-pound weight from just bringing in a serving of something? And that, you'll definitely see that with food sensitivities because you hold on to the water, right? Of course, like there's no way that broccoli caused you to gain 3 pounds overnight, but you will see that on the scale when you eat your food sensitivities because of water inflammation. So, and even things like cardiovascular disease, like one of the things that we talk to patients about, it's just like a simple home test they can do. So if you're curious about this, and this doesn't rule everything out, it's just one of those indicators. So, but take your pulse before you eat your food or your dinner, eat your dinner and take your pulse again. A lot of you will notice your pulse goes up from that. And those are the inflammatory components of food that you're eating. And so it can even have implications in terms of cardiovascular disease.
Very cool. So what I heard you say, you do a food sensitivity test. Hey, you hope people eat 25 foods, but all 25 foods you eat are on that list. What are you starting to think in your mind when you start seeing stuff like that? That, hey, everything you say you eat, you react to. What does your brain start going to in that sense?
Yeah, I think your gut is leaky because it's that exposure that you're having. And so on one hand, you might just go, oh, well, it's just whatever I eat, that's what I'm going to be reactive to. And exposure does matter. The more you eat of something, the more you increase the chances of it. But it's not an absolute 1-to-1 like that. So if I were just to take your history and say, okay, you're the top 20 things you eat, don't eat those right now, we might not really get to the end goal line as quickly as possible, because it's not just the food you eat, but what did it do in the immune cells in the gut lining? And there has to be some cueing and some immune confusion for that. So you can also see foods you don't really eat that often, having a reaction to. You might go, wow, cranberry came back and I only eat those once a year at Thanksgiving. And that can happen depending on, how your immune system is behaving at that moment. And your immune system is always changing how it's behaving based on infections that it's presented with, based on pesticides it's presented with, based on stress it's presented with. And so all of that plays into food sensitivities. Many people will say, well, if my patient is sick, I know their gut is leaky, so why would I do a food sensitivity test? And I think that there's kind of a middle ground here. And I do think, absolutely, we can get people started on elimination diets. That's a great way to start. Just like you said, we're going to take some things out, and most people are going to feel, a good bit better from that. And then work on some things to build the gut lining. And then maybe if you're not exactly where you would like to be in terms of health goals, you're still having symptoms. Now let's look at some food sensitivities and see if there's something you're still reacting to. That's a very stepwise way of bringing it in to see where we're at. Now, sometimes with patients, I'm just going to act faster. If you're having 20 bowel movements a day, or even like severe migraines or severely depressed, I might not give it the 4 to 6 week just elimination diet trial. I might say, go ahead and pull those out, but let's draw some blood. Let's get the inflammation out as quickly as possible, because that causes symptoms to shift more quickly. So all of this gets folded into how you're presenting, what your goals are, and individualized, even the testing. And, it's nice to have, because as you start to learn about supplements and learn about nutrition, there can be a tendency like, oh, I want to take this, I want to take this. And before you know it, you're on 20 different things and you don't even know why you're on them. And do they overlap? Do they have any interactions? And so doing some basic testing like this can say, nope, you're more of a gut patient. Nope, you need to do more detox first. And so it can really streamline things in terms of care.
So 2 things you said hit me there. One, sometimes you're right. I think we have to put something on a paper to show our patients, hey, there's a problem here, or they just won't do it. I think that's key. But the other thing you just mentioned is you may have leaky gut. You may have food particles getting into your system that shouldn't, but your body may not react to them. So that's the other thing I heard. It just because you have leaky gut don't mean you're going to react to every food you eat. And that's something I really kind of never put much thought about. That's a good call out there.
Yeah. And also those things that you made those antibodies to, those IgG antibodies actually attack the gut too. So if you don't take those foods out, much harder to rebuild the wall. You're going to be taking supplements for longer because, you're repairing on one hand and hammering it with a sledgehammer on another. So
good call. So leaky gut is a term everybody hears online. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you and I tell a GI doctor leaky gut, we got laughed at. Now it's well recognized. And so we don't have to worry about that. But sometimes it gets oversimplified. So you mentioned a lot of things already about leaky gut. How would you define gut barrier dysfunction clinically so that a general layperson gets it, but also a practitioner gets a better understanding of what's happening?
So when there's gut barrier dysfunction, when that permeability occurs, more things flood in and it ignites the immune system, and that creates inflammation. But inflammation can be very non-specific. Like we might think inflammation and think, oh, like when I twist my ankle or like when I overdo it at a workout or something like that. And certainly pain is a form of inflammation. But there's all types of inflammatory mediators in the body that, for example, can even block our production of serotonin in the brain, or can damage inside the cell, the mitochondria that makes energy. And so inflammation itself is not per se a diagnosis, but it's a process behind the diagnosis. So I think about generalized inflammation as being something that's kind of washing over your genetics, causing your weak spot to expose itself. So on one hand, what conditions are more associated with food sensitivities? Yes, of course, we'll see some things that have a stronger connection. Of course, irritable bowel disease like celiac or Crohn's, or even irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. But some things might surprise you too, because it can create inflammation it's not always gut pain. You don't always experience gut pain when the gut becomes permeable. And so this inflammation washes in again and influences your genetics. So there's a lot of research with, for example, food sensitivities and depression. And so that might not be immediately obvious. A lot of research with food sensitivities and headaches and migraines. And so Yes, there are some conditions that tend to be more related, but if you have inflammation in your body, if there's an inflammatory component to that chronic condition that you're experiencing, basically think of it like this. You could take prednisone, an anti-inflammatory, and it's great at shutting off inflammation. It just has a pretty significant side effect profile as well. This is another way to decrease inflammation, often as strongly as prednisone would, but without the side effect profile.
Love that. I'll throw another thing is that I've seen in clinical practices. You mentioned inflammation. The other thing I see is allergies. I find people who have clean guts typically have less allergies, but those that are nasty, leaky guts where the immune system is just ready to attack anything, the littlest of allergens cause massive response. Do you see that also?
So true. Absolutely. And people that are on that immune continuum. So yes, allergies, asthma, skin issues, dermatitis, those are big areas too, for sure.
So let's talk zonulin. And what does zonulin tell us in terms of this leaky gut picture? What do we learn from it? What exactly is it?
So if if you're this far in with us, then I'm pretty excited about leaky gut and changing the diet and all of that, and have to define this as being one of those big deals that creates inflammation throughout the body. And so zonulin is something we can measure, sometimes in stool, sometimes in blood. Both can be done. Both are good. And when we measure it, it is a signal that tells what are called tight junctions, the little Lincoln log attachment points in the gut lining. It tells those tight junctions to open up. So when we think about leaky gut or gut-based permeability, zonulin is like the key that goes in and says pop and pops the door open so that we become more permeable. So if zonulin does this, we can measure zonulin. And the more zonulin you have, the more leaky you are. So we can measure it and know exactly how much gut permeability you have. And so this is really useful because as much as I've talked about gut-based permeability and creating inflammation, well, it's not like everybody has the same thing and presents in the same way. So how leaky is your gut? And it's a beautiful thing to be able to look at because, for example, Alessio Fasano, who's now at Harvard, who really popularized zonulin, he found that zonulin, for example, goes up before the onset of autoimmunity. And that's really fascinating because what this says was there was a trigger that caused your genes to express that autoimmune condition, right? Like most of us aren't born with rheumatoid arthritis or born with lupus. So like we think about autoimmune disease as happening as a little later in life. And so what was the trigger that caused those genes to start acting that way? Well, Fasano has shown zonulin making the gut more permeable or leaky. Now things leak in. Again, it creates more inflammation, washes over your genetics, and causes autoimmune disease to express itself. In fact, if we get right down there into a genetic level and we look at the DNA, where zonulin is at on our DNA is the same area where a lot of autoimmune conditions are expressed as well. So even genetically, they're like super tied together. And that's all academically fascinating. But where the rubber hits the road, it means that we have things that we can do to put the immune system back in balance that aren't prednisone, that aren't steroids, that working on making the gut less leaky can do a similar thing without the side effect profile.
So zonulin shows up elevated, and you have somebody that has brain fog, cardiovascular issues, autoimmunity, insulin resistance. So just because the gut barrier is open don't mean things can get in there. So what are the other things you could look at to indicate or test for to say, you definitely have leaky gut. Now let's go attack it and clean it up. What are the other things you might look at? I know there's LPS antibodies, things. What are the things you like to look at to check the boxes and say, okay, yes, other than zonulin, you have leaky gut, and here's how I know.
Yeah. So when I first discovered zonulin, I was like, oh, here it is. It's the one thing that tells us if the gut is leaky, we got it, we can measure it, we'll track it, we'll treat it. And then you would have some people who were having just horrible gut-based symptoms and they had a normal zonulin. And I'm like, what is going on here? Well, the body's never that simple. So it turns out there are multiple ways to get leaky. Zonulin tells tight junctions to open, but I even mentioned those IgG antibodies that you're making to food can keep the gut more permeable. That's a second way. Sometimes we just wear down our gut lining. Like we don't break apart the Lincoln logs. Again, we just kind of bash through with a sledgehammer. So that would be like overuse of NSAIDs, wear down the gut lining, even so much that you ulcerate. So that's pretty permeable. It's just not zonulin mediated. And then, like you said, bugs, little bad bugs, they shed these things called lipopolysaccharides, and that damages your tight junctions too, causes the gut to open from that as well. So consequently, we can look at all of those too. So we can measure zonulin. We can measure how thick your gut lining is. There's something called diamine oxidase, and we make it right there in the gut lining. So the less gut lining, the less we make. And it's a really cool biomarker because it also degrades histamine. And so when your gut gets leaky or even just thinner, you don't handle histamine as well. It's just exactly what you said earlier about the allergy people, that they when you have allergies, you tend to have leaky gut and vice versa. If you get rid of the food sensitivities and build up your gut lining, you make more of the exact enzyme that's the primary way we break down histamine. And I just think that that's really fascinating. So you'll work with like time and time, work with a patient. They come in for IBS and for the gut pain that they're having. And we work on that piece of it. And the spring allergy time rolls around and they go, I'm not really having the allergies I usually have. What's up with that? And they are literally making more anti-inflammatory internally. And then, like I said, you can measure those little bits of bugs that might be damaging the tight junctions too. And so we can look at all of these things so we know, are you leaky, how leaky, and what's the cause? And then rather than saying, I read about these 20 supplements for leaky gut, we know which ones are going to be most specific for the patient. And we know we probably don't have to do them forever because we're treating something specific.
Gotcha. So you do this testing, leaky gut's obviously there. We need to fix it. What's your gut repair sequence? I know that's probably like a 2-hour lecture, obviously, but at a high level, diet, lifestyle, some key supplements you think are factors. What is your kind of go-to in terms of making sure that gut lining gets fixed? Because obviously it then sounds like if we don't start there, all these downstream problems aren't going to go away. So
No,
what does that look like for you?
Yeah, you're just not even going to absorb other therapies as well. It was despite,
right,
in addition to all the inflammation. So absolutely, you check the first two most important boxes, which are diet and lifestyle. We can't skip that part. We gotta get the inflammatory foods out, but we also have to learn how to, not to be more resilient in the face of stress. Because if you are stressed, you are in fight or flight. You are not in rest and digest, the other part of the immune system. And it literally shunts blood away from your gut to the periphery, to your muscles, so you can run from the stress that was there. But it means your gut lining's not getting blood flow. And so, you are absolutely right. We have to do that part as well. But then from there, if I'm going to help the patient in terms of, and really they're helping themselves, and that's the most important thing. But if we're going to work together, how about that? That's more accurate on how to help their gut get better. Where I really love, I'm going to say glutamine because it's the preferred fuel for enterocytes and amino acid. But then I'm going to quickly say immunoglobulins, especially as it relates to this conversation. So immunoglobulins are immune, and they come from different sources. They typically come from ways that we would feed our offspring, so like breast milk. And so they could come from colostrum, but they can also come from, example, eggs, because the immunoglobulins end up in the egg because the chicken's not going to breastfeed. That always creates a very funny image in my head, but the chicken's not breastfeed. And so they pass their immunoglobulins in this egg. So there's different ways we can extract immunoglobulins, but essentially we're extracting something that's very high or equivalent to what's very high in breast milk. And as we know, kiddos that get to breastfeed, and it doesn't always work out, they're not blame or shame or any of that. This is just, hopefully it can, because it does have health advantages. So that breast milk has immunoglobulins, and they're one of the major things that tell the gut lining, hey, let's not react to foods. We're learning all these new foods. We haven't seen them before. Let's not treat them as foreign invaders. So they're really good at, first of all, when we start to couple them with foods we're eating, maybe that food reintroduction stage, like I was mentioning, really telling the immune system, this is supposed to be here. This is normal. Don't react to it. But the second thing they do is they look a lot like zonulin that tells tight junctions to open. Now, wait a minute. You're going, wait, that's not good, right? We just talked about how bad that was. But the fact that it looks like it means it'll sit in that receptor and it blocks zonulin from getting there. It doesn't cause it to open. It kind of partially binds and acts defensively. And so they directly shut down some of that leaky gut. And that's even, and then they do other things. They build the immune system in the gut. They help fight off foreign invaders. So I really like something like, and I'll use when you derive them from eggs, they're called IgY. They're not called IgG or IgE. And so in some ways, they don't make our own immune system as inflamed, but they will really help at that gut-based space. And so I really love, I mentioned glutamine. I really love immunoglobulins. And then, yes, probiotics have to be part of the picture. They're really good at training for tolerance. They send signals to our genes to say, hey, let's not be as reactive to things. And here's this great study that just shows how amazing probiotics can be. So, for example, and this is allergies, but it turns out allergies also get better when you treat leaky gut. So both the IgG and IgE. But in this study, they were looking at allergies, kiddos that react to peanuts, needed EpiPens. And they looked to see, okay, and they were also doing desensitization injections. Now you can get desensitization for under the tongue. That's probably the better way to do it. But this study wasn't doing it that way. Okay, so we're doing it the less best way, which is injections. And then from there, one group got probiotic and one group didn't. And they looked at them in 4 years. Who could now tolerate a peanut? In the group that merely did desensitization, 4 years later, only 4% could still tolerate a peanut. And the group that did desensitization plus probiotic, 84% could tolerate the peanut 4 years later. So that shows you how important our microbiome is really in retraining the immune system. And so that would round out my top three. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of people go, well, I can't do a probiotic. When I take a probiotic, it hurts. It creates some discomfort. And I would say the research is overwhelming that probiotics should decrease abdominal pain, decrease gut-based pain. So if you feel bloating or discomfort from a probiotic, it's competing with some other bug there. You've diagnosed part of the problem. So you have what's called dysbiosis, bad bacteria. So if you're going, yeah, but I can't really take a probiotic, you've got other bugs. There's a war going on because it will fight with those other bugs, and that fighting can create some disturbance. So even though eventually, if you probably stuck with the probiotic, you're going to win that battle. But yeah, so if you're thinking I can't really tolerate them, then that's not the probiotic. That's your own microbiome trying to fight back.
So I heard you say glutamine to feed those enterocytes, immunoglobulins to help kind of calm and retrain that immune system, and then a probiotic. So in that case, let me give you an example. Yeah, I've heard the same thing. Is there a certain type of probiotics you go for in that person that does struggle when they take a probiotic that tends to cause a flare, or that competitive aspect that you go to that tends to cause that less? So there are certain probiotics you like to lean to that are less likely to cause that, especially at first while working on this?
Yeah, sometimes a spore-based probiotic can be a little bit better for a more sensitive patient. And that's likely because of where it opens up in the gut. So it's probably not competing with as many bad guys in general. And that can be good at first. And so there are ways to help with this. And then sometimes just even backing down the dose of the probiotic that you have. And I'll say another thing, if you aren't having regular bowel movements, you are somebody who often will struggle with a probiotic because we got to have that good movement. If it's going to compete with things, then we want to move them out. They can't just sit there. So that can be problematic for some people. So sometimes it's not even per se the probiotic, but getting them to have more bowel movements. We might give that a fancy term, like we're going to put somebody on a prokinetic or something that causes them to move. And those can be different botanicals, but that could even just be magnesium helping you have regular bowel movements. So basic answer, spore-based can be a little better for our sensitive people, but it could probably tell us some other things that give us clues about next steps.
Great pearl there. I like that. That's awesome. Just a tie-in. We've talked about the foods. We got the leaky gut. It creates some oxidative stress. And we all hear the phrase oxidative stress. Like most people don't understand that. I mean, it sounds cool. What exactly is oxidative stress?
Yeah. So oxidative stress really is something that people do understand. It's just that's what we want to do in the medical discipline. You come in and say you have a sore throat. I go, you have pharyngitis. You feel like I've told you something now. All I've said is you have a sore throat, but I just gave it a label. So that's a little bit like this. Oxidative stress is a label, but it just is a label for free radicals. And we're very familiar with that term. And so free radicals, they damage our tissue. Antioxidants, they squelch that free radical and protect us. And so that's really what we're talking about. And when we look at chronic conditions and when we look at many pathologies out there, they get worse with oxidative stress. So one example, depression. And so if I asked you what causes depression, many people would say a low neurotransmitter. And you wouldn't be wrong, but in some ways you might just get partial credit for that answer because, and especially let's even do this. Now you tried a medication that helps neurotransmitters and you didn't feel better. So it must be something besides just the neurotransmitter. And meta-analysis show from the Journal of Psychology a few years back that most antidepressants have about a 30% efficacy in general. So that would mean there must be at least 70% of other things going on. Oxidative stress is a good example of that. Too many free radicals in the brain. And so when there are too many free radicals in the brain, the environment is messy and the neurotransmitter can't bind to the receptor. It can't do the job it needs to do. And so this is really just so true of kind of all integrative medicine. That's a big difference. So on one hand, standard of care is going to say increase the neurotransmitter. We would say that too. And we might even do that short term through a medication if someone's in a crisis state, et cetera. But what else is going on? What is making it so they need that that medication? That is the oxidative stress. That is the free radicals. So if we get rid of the oxidative stress, now the neurotransmitter works better, maybe from the medication, even the ones they make. And now we can give other things to help the body make more of its own neurotransmitter. But it was that oxidative stress that was the static in the brain, making it not work like it should. And this is well demonstrated on studies. For example, if you biopsy the brain of somebody post-mortem once they're dead, which I know is weird, but that's what scientists do, the ones that have more depression have higher levels of oxidative stress. And we're also seeing, for example, if I biopsed your dead brain back in 2016 versus 2024, if you had depression or dementia, more oxidative stress, and also a lot more microplastic. So when we're thinking about all these toxins out there, and maybe we hear about microplastics, and there's a thing on Netflix right now, we're wondering, yeah, but everyone's exposed. How much damage is it doing to me? That's what oxidative stress markers tell us. Is it too much exposure for your body, creating free radicals? You don't have enough antioxidants to keep up with the amount of toxins that you're seeing, so you have oxidative stress.
So if someone has oxidative stress, why isn't the answer simply just take more antioxidants?
It could be, but how many and how long and which ones are you going to take? Because vitamin E is antioxidant, vitamin D, vitamin C, broccoli has antioxidants, grapes have antioxidants, even onions have antioxidants, right? So which one, how much, how long? And that's a very hard question to answer just from a guess. Now, and also now layer onto that, you have a condition, you have pathology, and that creates more oxidative stress. So even if you're doing a really good job, you're putting blueberries in your smoothie and you're drinking green tea, and those are all beautiful things to do. Is it enough antioxidants to also keep up with pathology in the body? Because it's real interesting. We talked about the gut getting leaky, flaring the immune system to create autoimmunity, for example. And then what happens next? Those antibodies start attacking your own tissue, cross-reacting. And when that happens, it creates oxidative stress. So in lab models in rats where they create autoimmunity, they've done things where they kind of hyperload with antioxidants. And what they show is very little progression of the autoimmune condition because the condition progresses by the damage it does to the tissue. So now if we can just measure that and make sure that you're coming into range, we've got you in a place where you're not damaging the tissue because we've controlled the oxidative stress. We've controlled the free radicals.
So, what's the one oxidative stress marker almost nobody checks, but you think could change how we talk about or think about prevention?
Yeah, well, you won't want, but okay. So I'll start with something called 8-OHDG. It has the worst name. Scientists are terrible at naming things. We already talked about IgE and IgG. They sound too much alike. Why didn't they just call it like, Bob and Keith? Those sound distinct and different, but we didn't. So here, again, terrible names, but and 8-hydroxy-2-deoguanosine, right? Even worse. No wonder it has a nickname. But if you struggled through all of that, you might have heard guanosine in there, and you might be like, wait a minute. Yeah. So back in ninth grade cell biology and DNA and whatnot, so guanosine is a base pair. So all that to say, this is a marker that goes up when your DNA is getting more damaged by free radicals. And we all know that that can be what leads to mutations that create cancer, but also 8-OHDG goes up when we have more exposure to environmental toxins. It's been associated with, is microplastic actually damaging your body? How about glyphosate or some of those pesticides that we use? How about when we talk about all of these in combination, like even if you measured, different chemicals that were out there, what about the cumulative body burden from all the different types? We would want to know that too. And that's what this gives us information about. Are you at that damage? And so when I go to the peer-reviewed medical research and I say, I don't want to know anything about a hamster or anything in just a lab, I want to know only human trials, clinical studies. And you will literally find thousands and thousands of references that show when 8-OHDG goes up, it increases your risk of things like cancer, but also cardiovascular disease. It goes up when we are getting more toxic. That could be from things from the environment, but even like mold aflatoxin, for example. And it goes up when the DNA is being damaged. And yes, that's in the nucleus, but that's also in the mitochondria. So we're back to ninth grade cell biology again. That's the powerhouse of the cell. So it goes up when your mitochondria is being damaged, which could result in feeling more sluggish and tired. But we also know mitochondrial dysfunction is really at the heart of cardiovascular disease and dementia. So all of that on a spectrum.
Gotcha. So we've talked about food sensitivities. We've talked about gut health. We've talked about oxidative stress. In your mind, thinking about this kind of plethora of things and how they all feed disease, what's the one test or marker you believe could change someone's health trajectory if they tested, caught it early, and paid attention to it?
Okay, so that probably would be that 8-OHDG for me, because the more oxidative stress, the more chronic inflammation. But if we added in a little sub flavor there, and you were to say like, okay, but what about cardiovascular disease? I wouldn't actually say cholesterol. There are different types of cholesterol that are even more predictive. And guess what? They're the oxidative types of cholesterol when they've been hit by free radicals. So oxidized LDL, so oxidative stress. So those free radicals are not only bad for your tissue, they're really bad for your lipids. Your lipids were great before they ran into a free radical. They're traveling around the body. They're getting incorporated into your brain. They're being put in the cell membrane. They're actually helping you make hormones. We do a lot of things with those lipids, but once they get hit by a free radical, that's the whole game changer. They can't be recognized by your liver anymore to be taken up and removed and used for things. And so now the immune system gets involved in like I always think of a Pac-Man, comes around, probably tells my age, right? Comes around like and chews up that lipid and sticks it in your vessel because the liver can't do anything with it anymore. So not only are these free radicals really bad for us, they're even bad for your lipids. And the marker that is more predictive for heart disease, 17 times more predictive than cholesterol, is this oxidized LDL. So yeah, I think that those are way up there. But really, I would love it. Remember back when they're like, I'd like to buy a world of Coke. So if it was like, I'd like to buy a world, a few biomarkers. And this kind of back to the beginning when we were talking about when people go in for those visits every year, they don't necessarily live longer than those who don't. And like I said, I think it's because we're not looking at the right biomarkers. So if we went in every year and we got to see an 8-OHDG, do you have too many free radicals? An oxidized LDL, that is more predictive for heart disease than the other markers out there. So now we've got cancer and heart disease, our top two things that we die from. Vitamin D does like a million things in the body. And this is where I always feel like, okay, now I'm going to list all 1 million, but we won't do that to our listeners. You'll just have to take my word for it. Maybe not quite a million, but way up there in terms of vitamin D. Prevents cognitive decline, helps your bone density, helps you make hormones, helps the immune system, helps neurotransmitters work better. And that's the short list. And then from there, something called CRP, which tells us about inflammation. It doesn't tell us about all inflammation, but it's a good start. And then I would finally say a hemoglobin A1C. That's the one that goes up when sugar is shriveling your body. So it can you're measuring a red blood cell to see how shriveled it is from sugar. But sugar, long before you get diabetes, that sugar shrivels your brain. That sugar shrivels your ovaries. Those tissues are way more sensitive than just general skeletal muscle, peripheral. So yeah, we don't want to. Sugar makes all your proteins just glycated, all folded up and not working like they should. So if we could spot check those areas, it would be much better than buying the world a Coke.
So when we walk into the doctor's office, if we just tell them we want the Burdett panel, they'll know what that is.
They better.
Awesome. This has been.
You're gonna have to do some explaining about that.
Gotcha.
But maybe there's a link section, and we can write down those 5 markers. That
we will definitely. I'll definitely make sure those are in the show notes. I do have a question. That 8-OH-DG, is that something a regular lab can use, or is that a specialty lab you have to order somewhere?
It should be a regular lab, as well substantiated as it is, but more of a specialty lab at this point. And then, like, you might be thinking, but why? If all that's true, what she's saying, then why would that be a specialty lab? Why isn't it being done every time? And again, it's back to, it doesn't give you a diagnosis. It tells you have too many free radicals. And also, in the standard care world, there's not a treatment for that. There's not a drug you're going to take for that. That is diet and lifestyle change. And so this is why it doesn't get measured.
Very cool. So you're a wealth of information. There's like 20,000 other questions I could ask you. Maybe we'll have to have you on another day. But if people want to learn more about your work and what you do, where can they find out about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to email me, cburdett@precisionpointdiagnostics.com. That name is long. That's because I did it. You can probably tell I'm wordy at times. So there we have it. And so I'm co-founder of Precision Point Diagnostics as a laboratory, and I'm also medical director for KHS, a supplement group out there. So look for me there. And then, look for Progressive Medical. So that's where I see patients and we're interacting. So, and that's in Atlanta, Georgia. So you're always welcome even just to stop by and check it out. I always feel like it's the Disney World of integrative medicine.
Yeah, Dr. Burnett, this has been super valuable conversation because I think we talked about it's not just about testing. It's about collecting numbers that mean something, relating to what's going on. And like you said, it's not a number to a diagnosis. It's a number to create a solution, to connect the dots, to ask the right questions and fix the things to move our health in the right direction. And I think you've set a really good plan for doing that. And I just want to tell you, thank you for today.
Absolutely. And right back at you, because this has been a great conversation, which requires some good listening. And I'm sure that your patients benefit from that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You have a great day.
All right. Take care.